Let's start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Jessie Brand, Director of Programs and Operations for the Global Wellness Summit and Institute. We're so excited to have you here for today's webinar, Heat of the Moment, Strategies for Thermal Wellness Business Success. Before we dive in, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know your name and where you're joining us from around the world. Here are some quick logistics. We recommend choosing side-by-side gallery view at the top of your Zoom window. This session is being recorded, and we will share the replay along with the chat transcript and any important links in a follow-up email to everyone who registered. Feel free to post your questions in the chat throughout the webinar. We'll do our best to reach as many as possible, but please note that we may not be able to answer them all. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Lisa Starr, Chair of the Consulting Best Practices Initiative. She will be guiding our discussion today and introducing our incredible panel of speakers. Lisa, good morning. Over to you and the other panelists.
Thank you so much, Jessie, and thank you to everyone who's joining us from around the world. It's great to see many familiar faces in the chat. I know that this topic is so hot right now, to coin a phrase. We know the data, right? I mean, GWI data shows us how thermal and mineral springs businesses are going crazy. We have 31,000 plus venues worldwide, generating 63 billion as of 2023, and the sauna market alone is expected to grow 6% a year from now through 2030. Why this is a topic for another day, but we know that saunas are social and bathhouses. People like the wellness, young people are attracted to them. And judging from my visit to Travis's location bathhouse last month on a weekday in Manhattan, there were so many people there. I thought no one must be working. So it's a great time to be in the business. However, it's a challenging time to get into the business. It costs money. It's expensive. Banks are sometimes loath to loan to a single use occupant like a bathhouse, which is a very specific use, and they're not easy to run, let's face it. So we're here today to tackle some of those issues. We will not get to all the questions you have, I'm sure, but please put them in the chat anyway, because we will follow up and perhaps we'll have another webinar. Before we dig in with our panelists, I'd like to take a quick poll. Jessie, if you could run that poll for us, it will ask you what your current bathhouse affiliation is, if you will. If you're just in the idea phase, you're operating one now, you're thinking about it, we'd love to hear back from you, and we will kick in at that point. So you have about 10 more seconds to get your vote in. I will begin with the introductions while we finish the poll. We have Lynn Curry joining us. Lynn is the principal at Curry Spa Consulting, and she is also on my task force for the consulting initiative. Lynn has a lot of experience with hydrothermal installations. We have Don Genders, who really needs no introduction, CEO of Design for Leisure and the chair of the GWI Hydrothermal Initiative. I do want to mention again that this webinar is a co-hosted by the Consulting Initiative and the Hydrothermal Initiatives, because we felt it was important to tackle some of these logistical questions. Last but certainly not least, we're joined by Travis Talmadge, who is the co-founder of Bathhouse, based in New York City at this point. 2 locations operating in Flatiron and in Williamsburg. The Williamsburg location recently expanded to 30,000 square feet or more. It's unbelievable. And I think Travis has plans to take over the rest of the world too. So thank you to all the panelists for joining us.
Wonderful. And do you want me to end the poll?
Yes, please end the poll.
Here are the results.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Thank you all for voting. Appreciate that. It's good to know who's here and how we can best help you. So let's get started with the high level. And Lynn, I'm going to go to you first, because as a consultant, hopefully you're the first person people reach out to when they have an idea about this. and they come to you and they say, I'd like to open a bathhouse with sauna components. What are some of the things, like the first few things you want people to think about?
Well, first and foremost, they have to consider making sure they have the thermal specialty team on board, which is usually, in most cases, not included with the typical spa consultant scope of work. You cannot do this without the expertise of the design drawings and the mechanical drawings being done by someone who knows and can create economies of scale between all of these thermal features that can work together. We have seen so many projects not work or go south or need renovations after as little as 2 years or 3 years because they did these projects piecemeal. So that's the first thing. And the second one is to make sure they understand it's not going to be $400 a square foot. It could be double or triple that, well, easily double, maybe even triple that, depending on what they're doing. So to get that out in front of them.
Okay, good to know. You're saying double or triple that. I mean, $1,000 a square foot. Does that include, Lynn, in your estimations, the entire space, or is it the bathhouse component of the space that may also have treatment rooms and a retail section?
That's a really good question, because that would be if you're designing an entire spa with treatment rooms and a reception area, and you're including a bathhouse, which is very surprising because sometimes the bathhouse itself drives up the cost. But there's also value in that just because you can accommodate more guests, you can accommodate a higher fee for your treatments, and you can provide a facility fee that helps you bump up your pro forma. So it makes up for it in the end. It's just sticker shock in the initial phases. The challenge is, I don't know, any consultants on this call will understand, very often we come on too late. Then by the time we contact Don, then he's also coming on too late. So that the best thing we can do is present these ideas early on, along with, of course, the guest use analysis and making sure they're designing at the right size for the market.
Okay, Lynn, one last quick question on that. When someone comes to you and says, I want to open a bathhouse, whether it's freestanding or part of a hotel, how do you think about the scaling of it? And then apportion the size to include the back of house necessities, the MEP that these facilities require.
Mm-hmm. We know from historical luxury spas that we've all worked on, that you need a lot of back of house just for treatment rooms. But you have to consider that your laundry can double just because you have a thermal area. Now, if your thermal area is one small pool and a steam room and a sauna, then that's a different kind of use. But if you're talking about a bathhouse like Travis, you're on a whole other level than what we work on, right? But you have to make sure that back of house exit with laundry bins is appropriate, because in a 10 treatment room spa with a small thermal area, you can have easily 1,000 pounds or 300 kilos of linen a day. And those bins have to go somewhere. And it's funny, we always spec a small residential washer dryer, a stackable washer dryer in our back of house, and it gets mistaken sometimes as, oh good, we have laundry taken care of. It's like, no,
Not
that
quite.
stackable is so that our smaller towels and obviously smocks and headbands don't get lost in the big laundry systems.
All right,
So you
great. Thank
have
you.
to add that space for
So
back of house.
we come to the consultant, we discuss the size, the scope of the space, and then we go to the thermal consultant, which would be someone like Don, or on Don's team, or several teams around the world that do this. So Don, tell us why it's so important to have you involved from an early stage. And Don, you should unmute yourself, please.
I'm just about unmuting myself. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
I often tell people and potential clients when we're talking in the very early stages that if you take a look at the Grand Canyon and then you think about what created that, and water created the Grand Canyon, And whilst water is wonderful stuff to bathe in and enjoy and have fun in, it can also be very dangerous stuff. It can be very aggressive. It can cause untold damage in properties if water is not respected and is not designed, or the property is not designed, for use of wet experiences. So that's not just, it's not just its pools. I mean, that includes showers. The amount of water coming down in cooling showers, the amount of water that comes out of pools with people walk out of them and they walk around and they drip and everything else. And steam rooms, that's water again. And these spaces are incredibly aggressive in many ways. And if you don't design the facility to cope with the water, to cope with the heat, to cope with the humidity, to cope with the correct ventilation levels, then you're actually going to create a not very comfortable space for people to bathe in. And you're also going to create an incredibly difficult space for the operator to successfully make a business out of it, because they're going to be constantly fighting fires with problems caused by poor design of a wet space.
Do you think that most people don't really understand how much the hydrothermal piece changes the architecture and the design requirements?
Well, I think that the most important thing is that a wet area has got certain requirements and certain needs. I mean, for instance, you've got to have drainage, you've got to have floor drainage. So when you're choosing your building, you've got to find a property. If you're not lucky enough to be able to build from the ground up, which the vast majority of projects aren't, then you've got to choose a building that is adaptable. And I'm sure Travis has had massive challenges, finding properties that could look, on the face of it, look fantastic, and then you suddenly say, well, hey, hang on a minute, what about all our mechanical, electrical, and all our plumbing services that we've got to fit into this building, because they're an incredibly expensive element. It's often a huge amount of money is there in what you don't see as opposed to what you do see. I mean, you'll go in and see a beautiful sauna and a beautiful tile and a steam room and a gorgeous hammam and whatever, but the amount of money that is making those facilities work is also significant, but of course none of it's visible.
Mm-hmm. How much space would you say you need in addition to what you do see? Like if however many bathhouse components are designed in, let's say it's 1,000 square feet worth, how much more space is it for the back of house to support that?
There's no strict rule of thumb, because it very much depends on how many pools you have, because every single body of water has got to have its own set of mechanical equipment. So you've got the filtration, you've got the sanitizing, and you've got the heating and the cooling and all the rest of it. So it very much depends on how many bodies of water you've got. But you could be looking at at 30 to 40%. If there's a lot of pools in a building,
Mm-hmm.
you can be looking at 30 to 40% of back of house space that is driving that that spa or that bathhouse.
Don, could I just clarify? So that's mechanical space, not including the back of house you need for your laundry and your staff, or are you including that?
No. I mean, in many, with a lot of pools in a facility, I'm talking purely the engine.
Yeah.
It's I'm not talking about what you've got in your back of house. I'm talking about your staff break rooms, your staff locker rooms, your staff changing areas, all the rest of it. This is purely the engine room.
Yeah.
Right. Good question, Lynn. Okay, so we have our facility, we have our design team, and then we're going to shift into Travis and talk from his experience. Travis, you're not a massage therapist or a sauna master by training. You are now. What was your job before you got into this industry?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. First off, before I was involved in Bathhouse and we went on this crazy journey, I was in real estate, which was very helpful. I ran an investment sales company, which means I was acting as an intermediary on institutional quality deals. So it was more like finance than real estate, but it was very helpful because the scale that we're doing things, there's a very big real estate component to our business. And Don touched on it, how difficult site selection can be, and capitalizing these projects. For anybody who's in the 25% that said they were considering this, I firsthand know how difficult that is. And so it really funnels down to a real estate problem, whether it's site selection, capitalizing the real estate, whatever it is. So that was my background.
Well, that was a perfect background to do this, really, that or finance. You don't need you. We have experts for the bathhouse part. So, Travis, you and your partner founded Bathhouse in Williamsburg. That was your first site. And how big was your original location?
Yeah, when we opened, the original site was 10,000 square feet. And I think, to Don Lynn's point, I remember really clearly, we almost took about 7,000 square feet. And at the last minute, we thought, oh man, we don't want to run out of space. It's kind of crazy to think about taking 10,000 square feet. Thank God we did that, because our first week, the big learning that we had was, hey, it's really great, it's going well, but oh no, we made this way too small. And I don't think we would have done it
First
any
week?
differently. Oh yeah. And yeah, I remember our second Saturday, and we had a line around the block, and it was a great problem to have. But instantly we were over capacity, and we had far more demand than we could accommodate, which was unknown, because our concept was existed in Europe, and different from a programming perspective, but at that scale in America, it was really pretty different from what existed, where the market was really dominated by spas, which was really a luxury experience, and not at all about the volume that we do, or the social component. And to Don's point, we made so many mistakes, an infinite amount of mistakes with our first one, and we try and get better about limiting our mistakes. But one of the big ones was, you don't know what you don't know. And so we certainly did not design our first facility correctly. And then any of our shortfalls we had to fix with labor. And fixing problems with labor is a really, really difficult problem. And so, like, Lynn and Don were talking about laundry. In each of our two New York locations, we do about 6,000 towels a day, plus linens for the massage program, plus other things. We're running our laundry room 24/7. We have effectively an industrial laundromat at both locations. In future locations that we're planning, we're making them even bigger. And we start our design actually thinking about the laundry room first, and then kind of building around
Love
that.
it.
Whereas in the first one, we didn't. And we were running carts through, and we were having to send out laundry. And I mean, it was just a whole thing. So I think the best advice to tack onto what Don was saying is, over engineer it. You don't know what you don't know, and it's really hard to add back later.
Do you feel like you're at the right balance now of washers, dryers to the business? Like you feel like that's working what you're doing?
Yeah, once you start to understand scale, it's pretty easy to model. So I would say that we are within a margin. If we lost a couple washer and dryers, we'd have a problem. But we backstock a lot of towels, just for a catastrophe scenario. And to that point, where do you put towels? They're really big, right? So you
They
need this
do.
back of house component. Our rule of thumb is generally, and it depends on the size of the treatment program, which is a whole variable in back of house and programming, but generally about a third of our spaces are non-customer facing back of house.
Okay. There's a question in the chat about how many bathers using 6,000 towels a day. And I think, Travis, you've said you have about 1,000 bathers at each location.
Yeah, roughly 1,000 customers, give or take, in each location. Especially on busy days. And it depends. This goes back to an operations question for the
Mhm.
people that are doing this. We do not put a time restriction on our admissions. We do not put a towel restriction on our admissions. Sometimes I wish we would. A lot of times when I go to other places, you're given one towel or two towels. Those are your
Exactly.
towels.
You,
And if you
you
want to
know,
bring or
like I
buy
better
more,
save
Yeah.
this, right?
if you don't, customers will use way more towels than you ever could imagine in your wildest dreams. So it falls back to your programming and your business model. But average customer uses 5 to 6 towels.
Unbelievable. Okay. You touched on something that I want us to discuss, which was the timing pricing strategy. All three of you, please weigh in on this. I mean, we've all been to spas where you pay a set fee for 2 hours or an hour. Some you pay a fee for the day. Sometimes the fee changes. And Travis, I know you are very good with your flexible pricing based on demand, but you let people stay longer. Can we discuss which of these models you've seen used and which have been more or less effective?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I mean, for us, we're really price takers, and we're in the volume business. For anybody who's not familiar with our business, we're a by the pound volume business, and our mission is accessible pricing. So we like to price our products so that anybody can afford it, maybe at a certain time of the day or certain day of the week, but it's kind of accessible and affordable to all. That kind of goes back to the roots of public bathing that, go back 5,000-6,000 years. Um, but it's a capacity thing. We design our facilities for peak capacity where we can handle a lot of volume. You see a lot of other business models where people will limit the timing of sessions, or they have much stricter capacity, and that affects price and it affects timing of sessions. So it's really a business decision of which business you want to be in. Now we know we're open-ended. We know, you know, pretty specifically how long our average customer stays. We have enough data, and we literally track how many people come in the door, come out of the door. We know how many people are in each part of the facility at once. And so we've, got a master's along the way in managing capacity and how we pace them out and how we track them. But it's there's totally different business models. Ours is kind of on one end of the spectrum. And then especially if you have a limited facility or limited capacity, timing becomes really important to manage that.
Yes,
In
Lynn,
the
can you speak to
smaller,
that? Yeah.
in the smaller facilities, like when you have a spa in a hotel scenario and you have a smaller thermal area, sometimes you have to yield manage that and actually book it as you would a spa treatment. You're going to go through the circuit, but it's going to be for this time allotment. And if it's a standalone treatment in the thermal facility or the thermal area, then there's a charge for that. And where it's much harder is when you're in a hotel where the brand standard is for all guests to be able to freely use the spa whenever. That's when it becomes harder for spa directors to yield manage. Or worse, when a sales department and the sales team is selling group business and they're trying to get those heads in beds and booking groups, and they're telling the meeting planner, oh, sure, you can have access to the spa while your group is in-house. That adds a big load that is suddenly unexpected for the poor spa director who's got to deal with all the extra linens. So it depends. I mean, Travis, it's so impressive what you're doing. And it's just in many places you do have to yield manage those times of day.
Yes.
And even book the individual sessions.
And we, to your point, we yield manage in our own way. A further complication on this, which is probably a whole separate conversation to get into, not for this call, but you're also limited by your software capabilities, right? So what kind of system are you using to manage it? What's your point of sale system? And a lot of times this is a growing industry where there's not a lot of great options for a lot of the business models that people on this calls are thinking of. So, you're not a spa, you're not a barber shop, you're trying to fit into these things that are designed for other businesses and kind of, adjusted around the edges to make work. And we've been through the journey. We've been through 3 POS systems. We're now on kind of an enterprise system, but that's another thing, is what can you do with the capabilities and the resources that you have? It's not just what you want, it's what can you actually deliver with a workable UX for the customer.
Travis, can you say more about what the traditional appointment-based treatment programs you might have been using didn't do for the bathhouse model?
Yeah, I want to be conscious of time just because it's such a rabbit hole and departure to go off on, but they're designed for different businesses. Part of that was our problem, and it's gotten a lot better because we had a not novel concept to humanity, but to the business infrastructure that kind of existed domestically, it was a little bit novel. And I think with our scale, it also changed things. So, you know, a lot of the POS systems out there that you would come to your mind at first or seem like good candidates, they're built for fitness classes or group fitness classes or nail salons or barber shops. And so they're just really made for totally different businesses at different scales. And that's a whole learning experience in itself.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So many
Lisa, we
things
do
we can
have
dive
some
into.
questions. We do have some more questions for Travis. Do you want to go through them?
I
Sure.
am going through them. Some of them we will get to. Travis, you were asked if you offer spa treatments, and I know you do offer massages. Or do you offer facials as well?
We do not. We did offer facials at one point and we discontinued that. Our facials were great, but it was just very clear that there are so many incredible facials out there. And it was, we like to really be experts at everything we do. And we want to focus our specialty on massages and scrubs. So we do massages and we do scrubs. Our massages are very different than kind of your traditional spa massage. We like to joke it is not a fancy back rub. It's not always comfortable to go through, but you feel great afterwards. It's more like PT. And then we offer scrubs, which are more traditional, kind of in line with the, you know, Turkish or Korean hammam scrubs, where our therapists really scrub the hell out of you.
Let's address another question, which has to do with leasing or buying your real estate. Now, if you're a small operator, you know, buying the real estate is one expense beyond building this thing, which is super expensive as well. And yet, if you don't own the real estate, maybe it doesn't make sense to make that kind of investment. Lynn, from your perspective, you're often working with someone that already has the real estate, but is adding the bathhouse component. Do you ever run into situations where that leasing versus purchasing question comes up? And then I'll come back to you, Travis.
Yeah, most operators are not going to lease the space necessarily. And I can't speak for all bathhouse, you know, investors, but it becomes more difficult. I mean, our experience is mostly working with owners of facilities, and then they have the freedom to do what they need to do. Again, it's very expensive to add the thermal component. And sometimes in an existing building, it's hard to know the infrastructure, if it can even handle things. You know, if it can handle a pool, if it can handle, you know, extra power requirements.
Well, we're
Travis.
finding in the
Go ahead,
bathhouse
Don.
market. Sorry, and we're finding in the specific bathhouse market, most people who approach us are their startups. And therefore they can't afford to buy a building. They need every penny they get their hands on to do the fit out. And so, you know, it's very specifically in the bathhouse world, we're seeing it's almost exclusively people renting and leasing properties.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. You know, the difficulty of all this programming, kind of regardless of what you're doing, and Lynn talked about it at the start of the call, is it's very, very expensive. And so you know, there's a lot of appeal to renting and there's a lot of appeal to buying. Either way, it takes a huge amount of money. To start backwards, the appeal of buying your real estate is that you can capitalize it, right? You can put debt on that property. And just like if you were building a condo or a new office building or something, you can kind of capitalize in the cost of the project there. Most people, when they're starting a business, can't do that. So that gets very difficult. When you're leasing, you know, the improvements are hugely expensive. So you might get a little bit of contribution from the landlord, but again, without credit, especially when you're building a new business, you're coming out of pockets. And I would say the consistent theme, whether it was us or anybody else, you're putting your savings into this business and really writing a big check to make the dreams come true. So, you know, I think the best advice, I kind of believe in this business that the two best cases for success are probably either to go small because you get the efficiencies of being small, or go big like us and get the efficiencies of being big. People that go in between, that's a really hard needle to thread because you kind of lose the best of both worlds. And obviously with small, the smaller the project, the smaller the investment. It's an easy way to start. You know, one example that I would bring up, I was in Minneapolis recently, and I was out there. We were looking at a site there that we're going to do, and I wanted to check out a shop that opened in the market called Portal. They have one in Denver, one in Minneapolis. They just opened the one in Minneapolis. I thought it was great. They took an old Jiffy Lube. For anybody who's not from America, that's an oil change thing. It looks like a McDonald's. It's probably 3,000, 3,500 square feet, and they turned a Jiffy Lube into this really great limited service, little contrast therapy bathhouse-like concept. It's got 3 saunas, a cold pool, small changing area, little check-in desk, and I thought it was great. And I could see how efficiently they build it. That's a great scale to start at. It probably cost them less than $2 million to get it started. They did some really intelligent things, value engineering the design, so it looks great, but it was pretty simple. That's a winning recipe to start with.
And that's
That is
something they did
great
right.
advice.
Right. That's something they did right. I mean, sometimes I have to talk myself out of a job, right? Because if there's not the budget to do it right, you shouldn't do it. Or if you don't have the space to do it right, you shouldn't do it. So yeah, that sounds cool though.
It was great, and their execution was great. If anybody's ever in Minneapolis or Denver, I encourage you to go to their place. I thought it was really terrific.
And it was Portal, right?
Portal, yep, it was great,
Yeah.
and you can see kind
Okay.
of what they did. But just a good example of, hey, reasonable format. I don't know if they bought it or leased it, but either way, it was a manageable investment. They worked with the building that they had and then renovated it for their needs. It's 1 story, so all the mechanical runs, Don can talk about this, all get super easy. Part of the difficulty that we have starting in urban environments, in our Flatiron location, we were excavating Class A granite 40 feet below ground in New York City. That's like a crazy thing to do. We're connecting to a cooling tower 20 stories up. It's not a great way to do things or start. So, if you can get a 1-story Jiffy Lube on a pad, your mechanical construction is going to get infinitely easier. And Don, I'm sure you could speak to that.
Oh, no, absolutely. The look, the adaptability of any potential building is what you've got to look at in the first instance. I mean, as you say, Travis, you've gone for densely populated urban locations, and of course you've got the benefit there of you've got a huge amount of people and therefore potential clients on your doorstep as well. So there's that great argument, but finding sort of freestanding properties in the middle of Brooklyn or Manhattan is not so easy. But in other cities across the United States and across the world, for that matter, there are properties around, and if the simpler the property, the lower your costs in general terms are going to be. I mean, if you're taking a floor or a few floors in a 10, 15, 20-story building, then that is going to cost you money. It's going to cost you an awful lot more money, just because of that property.
Yeah. And Don, just to tack on to what you're saying, because it just made me think of it, like, with these businesses, they get complicated as they get bigger. And, Lynn works with a lot of clients that have hotels and are doing a hospitality component, and it goes in a lot of different directions. But if you're going to start one of these businesses, the great thing, the beauty of these businesses, which is exactly how we started, was if we didn't have the demand, my partner and I could have literally operated it ourselves. He could have worked at the desk. I could have been picking up towels. Depending on your demand, if you build them the right way, or even within a margin of what's right, people go and they go on their own journey, and they're very, very low labor. When you get to a certain scale, the way we do them now, we have an insane amount of labor, but it's a function of demand. It's a function of scale, but they are not complicated businesses in their kind of simplicity. Don, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that really goes back to building them the right way, where there doesn't need to be a big labor component if, depending on your capacity and your volume.
Well, I think you've got a good point there, Travis, because look, the fact is that, getting as much open plan space as you possibly can, because that means you've got fewer people to be able to keep an eye out and see around it and see what's going on and where the needs are. They can see overflowing laundry depositories and all these various things. But the fact is that in comparison to just about anything else in the wellness space, you as a bathhouse operator probably still have the lowest staffing levels of any other of that business. And that the fact is that you can also gear up your staffing levels to cope with your demand, and you can
Correct.
grow it as
Yep.
you get your demand, and you can see when your busy periods are. And I like your model, and I always recommend to people, and always have the idea of, it's almost self-governing how long people are going to stay there. I mean, no one, I'm sure you'll get somebody who'll come in there for 4, 5, 6 hours at a time, or whatever it is. But the vast majority of people have got other things in their lives or whatever, and then so restricting them and saying, oh, well, you got an hour, or you got an hour and a half, or that's it, and you got to, everyone with a blue wristband now has to leave or whatever. That's a separate management nightmare in its own right. And I think getting it right and spreading it across the day with different dynamic pricing, or however you do the pricing for peak times and off peaks and all the rest of it. And I think that helps in doing, and you can judge your demands and your peaks and your troughs, and gear up your staffing accordingly.
Sure, and
Well,
they're all
it's
connected. Just to say one last thing on it. If you're in a dense urban environment, to Don's point, it's easy for people to pop over. If your pricing is low enough where it doesn't need to be a precious experience, where somebody can do it on a whim, they're going to pop in for 45 minutes, take a sauna and cold plunge, and move on because it was priced effectively to do that. If you look at the other end, like a Therme, where they're building huge projects that are not necessarily in the city center, somebody's spending a whole day there. By the time that they go and they make the journey out there, they'd be crazy not to spend 4 or 5 hours out there. So I think your product dictates your your demand and the customer experience, and it's all interconnected.
And also
these
the
are
booking is
great
easy.
points.
You can just take walk-ins, whereas in a traditional spot you can't. But also, Travis, you've been smart in that you know what you are and you have built what you are and you've kept it that way. You haven't tried to, get all the latest and greatest things in your spa. You decided to eliminate facials. That was a smart move. You know, a lot of times we hear an owner wants to do more and more in their facility, and then you're turning it into something that it's not meant to be. Keep it simple.
Keep it
You know,
simple.
it's the-
Yep. Always a great rule of thumb.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
Well,
I
I
think
think
what Trevor said
so.
earlier on was so true as well, that you know okay, he didn't do it the first time, but he'll do it every other time. Is you start with your engine room. He starts with the laundry. Because you've got to start with these incredibly important elements of your business, because if you don't get that engine room sized right and operated right and designed right, then you can do the most wonderful things and the rest of it, but none of it'll work properly. And so starting from the point of view, and nobody ever wants to hear this, because every time we ever speak to a new client, particularly somebody coming in the industry for the first time, which we're seeing is almost exclusively the situation within the bathhouse movement. And people are coming in, and of course, they want to concentrate on the bit that the public are going to see. They're going to concentrate on, what's the wow factor, what's everyone going to, but actually the wow factor is going to be how well the damn thing works, and it's going to be, it's not going to be what it actually looks like. It's going to be how good it is and what the guest experience is like at the end of the day. And it's that guest experience that keeps them coming back.
Mhm.
And this whole message of you're getting hot, you're getting cold, and you're resting, and it's those three elements, because you can't keep getting hot and go from a hot room, a hot pool, and backboard a hot showers or whatever. You've got to have this contrast therapy side of it, and you've got to have the relaxation in the middle, and getting this cycle right, getting your distribution of your guests right as they move around the facility. Those are the ways you need to plan it, is to get your spaces right and make the spaces work for the people who are using it, because that's what brings them back again and again and again.
And sometimes the simplest things like drippy bodies, keeping drippy bodies from crisscrossing with dry bodies. We've seen it over and over again where there's no way to get from the pools straight to your locker room shower. You got to walk through some relaxation lounge in order to get to your shower. So, and the entrance too, you don't want to see people in their street clothes coming in when you're in your swimsuit.
Yep.
We're making great points about size, and we are seeing a lot of these bathhouse, social wellness places popping up that are small, like the Jiffy Lube. I love that example. They are sometimes utilizing the outside, and especially we've seen that quite a bit in Europe, but we're starting to see it in the Pacific Northwest and Canada, where you have a sauna or bathhouse location on a lake where they can go out in the water for the cold plunge part. They don't need the engineering. These are great ways to start small and test the demand, because to Travis's point, the bigger you get, the more it costs. And someone in the chat mentioned a low barrier to entry. I would hardly say it's that, given that even a small place will be $2 million. And if you don't have the $2 million, the banks right now are not all that anxious to give you some. Because, as we said, these are single-use facilities. If you build a bathhouse and it fails, it can't really become a donut shop, right? It's a bathhouse. So, that is a challenge that we are also facing. Let me jump, however, to the staffing that we've touched on. Part of the reason I think that these models have become popular is because, from our traditional spa appointment-driven standpoint, labor has been 60% and higher of our revenue, which is very, very difficult to maintain quality. A bathhouse has a much lower labor to revenue ratio, except in Travis's case, where he's servicing the whole of New York City. So there's a big up cost front to get in, but there's a lower operating cost long term. Let's talk about how the dynamics of that work in terms of financing.
I don't know if you want me to start or if Don or Lynn want to start. Maybe I don't know, Lynn, maybe you want to start because that's probably an interesting perspective that you have with where you come in on these projects.
Yeah, what we've seen is that the good thing about adding a thermal area when you have a traditional spa, especially when it's in a hotel, especially if it's in a luxury hotel or a place where you need to make sure you're taking care of all your guests, the benefit is that when your treatment rooms are sold out, then you have something for your guests to do that evokes wellness. And it can be a charge, it can be a fee, or it can be just something that you include for the guests. And then also one attendant or two attendants can be in that bathhouse bringing people tea, bringing them their towels. And then suddenly you have multiple guests. It's like F&B, your labor's low because you've got one person serving, 5 4 tops, and it becomes kind of like that. The other thing about the treatment rooms in the spa is that we cannot build enough treatment rooms for the peak demands. We have to build them in such a way that forces the operations to really truly yield manage. From a staffing standpoint, you don't want too many staff requirements. So that bathhouse concept with a spa really does help that too. Because frankly, in most places, whether you're a ski resort or a city, everybody wants something wellness at the end of the day.
Travis,
So
did
the
you want to
bathhouses
speak to
do
that
help.
also?
Yeah, no, I agree. I want to make sure I answer your original question, Lisa, and I want to make sure I'm understanding it. So I know you wanted to talk about the financing component. Just ask me specifically so I hit it on the head.
Well, when you want to open this, you have this big upfront cost and a smaller operating cost, or you have a smaller upfront cost and a larger operating cost. I mean, what is your experience with the banks and how they are looking at that? What they prefer?
Yeah, it depends. We don't use debt, so I don't. Our company doesn't go out and ask the banks for money for debt, at least not right now, and hopefully won't have to. I have a little bit of an allergy to debt. We will have our development partners get it on the property level. We get a lot of. We have 2 bathhouses, and then we have 7 to 8 that are in various stages of development across the country. Most of those. We've actually had the landlords and developers capitalize for us, which is a big victory that we're really happy about. It's worked out great for them and works out really well for us. Look, when we did the first one, we did it with our own equity. We raised a little bit of money, but it was mostly our own investment. And so you have to size it to what's manageable
Right.
and you kind of do it with cash for lack of a better term. And even the second one, we used money that we were making and then we raised a little more money and that's really the way to do it. And it gets dangerous because if you go over budget, then what do you do? right? It's hard whether you're using financing from a bank or cash. It's always hard to go back and get more. And so that's why I think starting simple, giving yourself a real budget, a real contingency, really important. And we've made those mistakes, as I'm sure everybody has. But and it goes back, that was a great question in the chat about barrier to entry. It is a lower barrier to entry to do something like a 4,000 square foot concept. It's all relative. If somebody has a couple $1,000,000 to put up, it's a very high barrier to entry, not only for an investment to do it at a scale of 30, 40, 50, 100,000 square feet. Also, the operations get very, very complex at that magnitude. So the barrier to entry, forget the money side, just on the operating side, is pretty low on a small scale. It grows exponentially as you get bigger, then it gets really complicated. But it's kind of a tale of two different businesses, even though the core programming is similar at different scales. But there is quite a barrier to entry, I would say, with the larger operations. Maybe we're just not that smart and it feels really hard, but it gets pretty hard when it gets big.
Well, the
I'm
investors
sure.
in the hotels are looking, they have a little bit of an advantage than what Travis has to
They're
do,
already in
right?
hospitality. Yeah.
Because they're in hospitality, and then I've seen where when we provide our spa pro forma, right, and we list everything possible that it's going to cost to be in there, they'll take the utilities out, they'll take a lot of the other things out and bury it into the main property
Yeah.
use, water, power, all of those things, laundry even, we've seen
Yeah.
that. So there's, you can skew the spa numbers to make them look better or worse depending on where else in the hotel is going to take up the slack. And
Yeah, and I
that's
think
very owner by owner makes those decisions.
Yeah, and Lynn, to you made this point in a roundabout way, but to your point, at a certain scale, you're in the hospitality business, no question about it, right? Whether you're doing a large scale spa or one of our large bathhouses, we are 100% in the hospitality business. When you're at a small scale, you're really building a commodity or a service business, and at some point that scale breaks, where you go from building a commodity or a very limited service business, and you find yourself in the hospitality business, and that's the big difference with scale.
That's a really good point.
Someone in the chat asked about locating them at existing thermal water resources, which is a lovely thing if you can do it, but those just aren't on every block. And so you have to find a place that has existing thermal water in order to build there. I don't know how high the frequency of that is. Don, can you speak to that?
Well, I mean, it's very much a sort of regional thing. I mean, thermal waters exist in many countries of the world, and often not necessarily in the most inhabited areas.
Right.
I mean, yeah, the United States is almost unique in many respects, that you've got a huge amount of thermal waters in remote areas. Whereas a lot of European cities with thermal waters, the cities grew up around the thermal waters. And that's a really quite a difference between the USA and and other parts of the world. But if you can find a property with thermal water that's undeveloped, then they're not going to be cheap today, because everybody is beginning to realize the value of thermal water. But again, it varies in from location to location who owns that thermal water. I mean, in certain parts of the world, for instance, if you buy a plot of land with thermal water in Switzerland, you don't own the thermal water. The local city or region will own that water, and you will have to pay for that water. So there's a lot of ways of looking at this and saying, look, yeah, if you can find somewhere with people and thermal water, then you've got a perfect scenario. But the chances are that where you got thermal water, and you haven't got people, how are you going to get the people to come to you? So then it's a case of how far into the hospitality world do you go, because you're going to have to build, a small lodging house or hotel to accommodate the people, because they've got to travel to come and use your thermal waters.
And you need to feed them.
Well, then you need to feed them. But I think that, look, thermal waters are absolutely wonderful. They are fantastic. And they've got huge health benefits as well, or an awful lot of them do have with the mineral content. But they are almost a separate discipline again. You know, we're talking about bathhouses now. You know, accepting many bathhouses started when there were mineral waters because we didn't have ways of heating up water, and if it was hot coming out the ground, then fantastic. You know, there was your free supply of hot water to go and use. But I think that the most important thing you've got to do today, because it is such a high entry cost to actually build one of these facilities, the first thing you've got to do start with is people. And you've got to have the right number of sort of chimney pots in that area to sustain that business and support that business. And you get it right. It's almost a case of build it and they will come these days with what we're seeing in the way that young people are changing their entire social life and the way that they're looking for experiences that are not nightclub party type places, and alcohol is no longer an essential component. And I think that's where you come to this business from is don't say I've got to have thermal water and then go looking for it.
Right. It's not a strategy you can hang your hat on in terms of where to build, right? It's just too difficult. So, Travis, there's another question in the chat that you may be able to answer or want to address. Can you tell us, just in general terms, I mean, your model has the bathhouse, it has treatments, you have a cafe at both locations that has excellent food and is very crowded. How do those different things contribute to the revenue in terms of like how much is bathing versus food, for instance, or treatments?
Yeah, our core business and our core product is admissions, to put it simply. That's really our whole business. And then everything is kind of an extension of that. The treatments are great. Lynn and Don can speak to this, and Lisa, obviously you have a lot of insight on this as well. But for us, the admissions are a much higher margin product. They're our highest margin product. And then the treatments are a much higher revenue product, right? It's a more expensive spend per customer. You're making more net dollars, but at a slightly lower margin because there's labor attached to each service that you're doing. And then the restaurant's great. It's great by restaurant standards. The restaurant business is not as high a margin business as other businesses, like an admission business or even like a spa or treatment business. With our volume, we do it because it kind of be crazy for people who are going through this contrast therapy. You get hungry, right? Your heart rate's going up, then your body's heating itself back up from a cold plunge, and you burn a lot of calories. And part of the reason it's good for you, it basically mimics cardiovascular workouts. So myself and everybody here and everybody that's saunaed, you get done, you're hungry and you're thirsty. And so we really have that restaurant to satiate the customer, physically, and also to continue their social experience because we're a very social business. So it's a meaningful part of our business. It's really a amenity to the rest of the business. And same thing with our retail. We have a pretty big retail business. Most of what we sell is bathing suits. We sell bathing suits because people need bathing suits when they come, and a lot of times people forget them or see one that they like better. So.
Funny. No, that was wonderful about the cafe. I spent many hours at Bathhouse Williamsburg for the Aufguss, the U.S. Aufguss World Championship trials, which happened there last month. That is where I got my hat. And Travis was a contestant, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But I went into the competitions, did the bathing, went to the cafe. I met a girl who was there for her birthday. She comes every year for her birthday, and she had a book, and she had been bathing, and now she was just reading her book, eating, and she was going to go back to bathing. We know that food and beverage keeps people around. While it has an expense and a health department ramifications and operating margins are different, but when you feed people, they stay longer. So that's great to hear. We have only a few minutes left. Is there any point any panelists would like to make?
If you're an owner, I just encourage you to get the thermal specialist on board first thing. You know, it's very important.
Okay.
And get your back of house and your MEP situated
Uh-huh.
that time too.
Good advice. Don?
Well, I think that the one takeaway that we need to recommend to people here is to choose your property well. Look and look again and look again and keep searching, but understand the complexities of what you're going to build before, don't go and find something because it looks nice or you think it's in the right location. Find the property. Don't say I've got to have it in this small geographical circle. Be prepared to sort of look slightly wider, because getting your property right, to me, is the critical part, because you'll say you get it right, and it can be a lot cheaper to fit out the right property than to fit out the wrong property, even though the wrong property looks better, or you think it's got more curb appeal or is prettier or whatever it may be. You've got to be quite ruthless in the decisions you make when you're choosing the property, because it's going to work. It's going to work hard, and that's what's going to make you money.
Yeah, I
I
think
have
that's a
one
great
last
point.
One last
I-
point I'm going to build on with you, Travis, sorry, on what Don said. It's about engineering the visit. And we had a question in the chat about, we know these are social wellness experiences, but I do hear prospective owners saying they want it to be quiet. They want to have no noise. We've had a question about social media, and I know, Travis, you addressed that, because you can't barter bathhouse visits because you can't photograph anything. So how do you control that social element in your locations?
Yeah, it's a great point. The one thing I want to say, just to Don's question, or Don's point, which I thought was really on the money, this is not, at least for us, and I think it is the wrong strategy to say, if you build it, they'll come. And that goes back to location. We are hyper focused on location. It is not a if you build it, they'll come thing. It's so hard to make a good business out of a bad location. So I would cement that point and commend Don on making that point. And as far as programming, look, people are different. I think with any business, no matter how great it is, it's really hard to appeal to the entire market. For us, we like the social culture of a bathhouse experience and bathing, and kind of the magic happens when you get all this energy of all these people together doing contrast therapy. That's not for everybody. So some people like the kind of relaxation and performative relaxation of a spa, and like the cucumber eyes experience, and that's great. No problem. Those are just two different products. So I think it goes back to what kind of product are you trying to build? Do you want a really fancy kind of quiet area, or do you want something that's built for energy and a social experience? And I don't know if there's a wrong answer. They're very different products.
Good. Well, good to know what you're going into. We need to wrap it up, but we could keep going, and we just don't have time. I want to thank all the panelists so much for their contributions and their candor. I thank Jesse and the Global Wellness team for hosting us. Travis, I want to mention that you, in addition to taking on ownership of bathhouses as a job title, have also become a sauna master, and you competed in the World Championships at your facility in the US, and you made it to the playoffs, which you'll go to in 2 weeks in Germany. So we wish you luck on that. That's really
Thank you.
getting into your business there. Lynn and I are representatives of the Consulting Initiative. Please visit there if you need to find any consultant anywhere in the world. There we have a huge list. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. It was really great. We will have a recording available. This will become a podcast on the StarCast platform next month, and I'm sure the video will be released as well. So thank you again to everyone.
Yeah, thank
Cool.
you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Travis, Don, Lynn. Was great to have you on this call. I also want to point out our new Global Wellness Institute initiative, Microtrends. Of course, Lisa's and Don's initiatives are represented there with their microtrends for the year. So check that out. You can get all that on the initiatives website that I just shared, but all these links will also be in our follow-up email. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. This was
Bye.
fun. Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
It's great to see you all.